this afternoon for this presentation on what the Dead Sea Scrolls tell us about the Bible. So, some of you may know in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd searching for a stray sheep accidentally made one of the most dramatic archaeological discoveries in history. Wandering among the limestone cliffs on the northwestern edge of the Dead Sea, which lies east of Jerusalem, he found a small cave in the crumbling hillside. And inside he found some large clay jars. And although most were empty, some contained ancient scrolls. He had no idea what he had found, but these hardy papyrus documents were the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Controversy has swirled around the scrolls since their discovery. Due to the instability in the Middle East, an international publication committee was established to translate them, but other scholars protested the group was too small and exclusive. Frank Moore-Cross was one of the first Americans to work on the scrolls, and in the early 1980s allocated some of the translation work on the scrolls to a promising PhD candidate at Harvard University, Sidnie Crawford. Sidnie Crawford eventually earned her doctorate in Near Eastern languages and was one of the youngest members of the publication team, earning her the nickname The Kid. She eventually edited 14 Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts. Dr. Crawford is currently the Willa Cather Professor of Classics and Religious Studies and Professor of Hebrew Bible at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. She has published several books on the Dead Sea Scrolls and presented her scholarship in numerous venues around the world, including Oxford University, where she was a visiting scholar. She is also an internationally recognized scholar in the areas of textual and feminist criticism of the Hebrew Bible, and she currently serves as chair of the Board of Trustees of the W.F. Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem. Today she will be presenting on the topic of what do the Dead Sea Scrolls tell us about the Bible. We are very fortunate to have an international scholar in Martinez. Also, she happens to be my older sister. So please welcome Dr. Crawford.
So thanks, Deb, for that very nice introduction. Too bad she told you I was your older sister. Otherwise, we'd think you guessed. So how many of you have heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Okay, yes. They're very famous, and rightly so. They really are the most important archaeological find relating to the Bible in the 20th century. They've taught us a lot about the history of the biblical text. And even though, you may think, well, these are really mysterious documents, what they've taught us has trickled down to us in translations today. So if you, for example, use the New Revised Standard Translation of the Bible, some readings of the Dead Sea Scrolls are found in that translation. So it's closer to you than you think. Well, let me just give you a kind of overview of what the scrolls are and where they were found. Okay, this is a map of biblical Israel. So here's Jerusalem here, okay? The area where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found is the area of Qumran, right here on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. And here's a close-up map. Here is the Dead Sea, here's Qumran, and the location of the caves where the scrolls were found. The original scrolls were found, as Deb said, by Bedouin shepherds who were pasturing their flocks of sheep and goats in the limestone cliff area above the Dead Sea. They threw a rock into a cave. Instead of hearing rock hitting rock, they heard the breaking of pottery. And even in 1946, 1947, there was a robust market for antiquities. And so they thought, aha, maybe we found something here. They went back into the cave later that week and discovered, this is the cave, okay, cave 1. And they discovered old leather manuscripts, treated skin of sheep and goats, rolled up and stored in these cylindrical jars. Well, they couldn't read them. Oh, it doesn't want to go back. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. They couldn't read them, but they thought they might be valuable. And so they brought them to an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem. He couldn't read them either, but he thought they might be valuable. So he began to let the word be known that he had these old scrolls. And eventually 3 of them were sold to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and 4 of them were sold to the Syrian Orthodox Church in Jerusalem. And this is the first one that was deciphered. It's called the Great Isaiah Scroll, or 1Q Isaiah A. 1 stands for Cave 1, Q stands for Qumran, Isaiah stands for the book of the Bible, and A is the letter that says it's the first one that was found. And let me just show you a little bit. This is a good way to see how these scrolls were put together. First of all, usually they would have been rolled just in one roll, not from 2 ends up, right? It would just be one roll. But you can see here this line of sewing, right? They're made of sheets of leather sewn together. Then each sheet is divided into columns. You can see the column here and the column here. Notice I'm going from right to left, right? This is Hebrew, so it's written from right to left. Then look here very closely, and you'll see these kind of faint lines. These are called dry lines that were made with a sharp instrument on the leather to guide the writing. And notice how straight the top of the writing is. Right? That's because in Hebrew, they hang their letters off the line. When we write English, we sit our letters on top of the line, but they do the opposite. They hang them from the line. So then you see how the scroll is copied. But wait a minute, what's this? Or what's this? The scribe made a mistake, missed some text, and so it had to be fitted in this case above the line, in this case down the margin, right? Because scrolls were too valuable just to throw away, right? If you made a mistake, you just fixed the mistake. So this is the only complete scroll that was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. It contains all 66 chapters of the book of Isaiah. It's about 7.5 feet long when you roll it out completely, and it's heavy, as you can imagine. This scroll and 3 others were wrapped up and stored in these jars. The jars protect the scrolls from the elements, right? And so damp, moisture, changes of temperature, mice and rats and other things that gnaw on them. And so that's why this scroll is so beautifully preserved. And here's a very interesting photograph. This is a local interest photograph. When the Isaiah scroll was purchased, it was brought to the American School of Oriental Research in Jerusalem, now the Albright Institute. And there was a young fellow there by the name of John Trevor, who was an amateur photographer, and he undertook to take the first photographs of the scrolls in the basement of the Albright Institute. Now, he is the brother-in-law of one of the parishioners of Grace Church Martinez, Bob over here, who's raising his hand. So he knows an original Dead Sea Scrolls celebrity. So you can talk to him after school, but that's a picture of his brother-in-law who has since passed away. But it gives you an idea of the rather primitive conditions that the people working on the scrolls originally worked with. Well, once the first scrolls were found, the scholarly community, of course, got quite interested and decided that they would excavate the site of Qumran, which was found, close to which the scrolls were found. And so this is a photograph of the 1951 excavations. You can see the tents they lived in back there, and this is right here in the front. Whoops. Sorry. Thank you. A ritual bathing pool, a mikvah, okay, in which the inhabitants immerse themselves. And the presence of this mikvah told us for sure that the inhabitants of this site were indeed Jewish. Because it's a Jewish ritual to immerse yourself. Well, so here is the site that was excavated by the archaeologists here on the plateau overlooking the Dead Sea. This is the Wadi Qumran right here. Wadi means dry riverbed, okay, and it gets flash flooding in the winter, but in the summer it's dry. Now, let me just go back here. While Qumran was being excavated, the Bedouin discovered other caves with other scrolls in them. And so here on this plateau here, they discovered cave 4, cave 5, and cave 10. There are 3 caves along here, cave 7, 8, and 9. Cave 6 is back here at the mouth of the wadi. And so you can see that the caves where scrolls were found are actually quite close to the settlement. In some cases you have to walk through the settlement to get to the caves. In other cases you just sort of walk around here to get to the caves. So it's all very close.
What's the distance apart?
What?
What's the distance apart from one end to the other?
From one end to the other, oh, you could walk it easily in 5 minutes. It's not very big. It's not very big. So what kind of settlement was Qumran? Well, it doesn't have any what we might call single-family homes, right? Homes where families lived. It has all community rooms. It's sort of like this room, right? This room is identified as the dining room where the inhabitants ate. How did we know it was the dining room? Well, right next door we found the pantry with all these destroyed dishes in it. This is another mikvah. You would go down the steps into the water in the bottom and immerse yourself. Now you might say, how the heck in that desert climate did they get water there? Okay, they channeled it from the waterfall from the Wadi Qumran down here across the plateau. Here's the entrance, here's the aqueduct coming in, and then it filled these various cisterns that I'm pointing out, and then it runs around. You can follow the aqueduct, okay? Here's another cistern, okay, and finally this is the last one. And so it has quite an extensive water system. Of course, it would have been roofed in antiquity, right, not open. And so they could store water for the dry summer season. Next to the site was a cemetery that held about 1,100 graves. Each pile of stones marks one grave, okay? And the site of Qumran existed from about 75 BC to 68 AD when it was destroyed by a Roman legion during the Great Jewish Revolt against Rome. Now, the cave in which the most manuscripts were discovered is Cave 4. And remember, this is on the edge of the plateau, so if you went around here, right, you would see the site of Qumran right there. So Cave 4 is right here. Unlike the first cave that I showed you, Cave 4 and the ones next to it are man-made caves. That is, they were excavated out of the rock here. It's a soft limestone. And here's another a little closer. You can kind of see here. And maybe originally used as dwelling caves, but in the end they were used to store scrolls. And unlike in Cave 1, where that beautiful Isaiah scroll was stored in the jar and protected from the elements, the scrolls in cave 4 were piled on the floor of the cave. So you can imagine if the site of Qumran was destroyed in 68 and the manuscripts were left there, right? It was another almost 2,000 years before they were discovered again. And so you can imagine the kind of damage that they underwent, right? They were covered with dust, they were covered with bat droppings, mice and other critters gnawed away at them to use them as nesting material, so that, whoops, I'm going backwards, sorry about that. By the time the cave 4 fragments were discovered, they looked like this. Okay? So, much less beautiful, except to a scroll scholar, than the Isaiah scroll. So, think of how the original scholars that were dealing with the scrolls felt when they were confronted with this kind of mess, right? It's kind of like they were faced with a jigsaw puzzle. There's no picture of the puzzle on the box cover. Half of the pieces are gone. For the other half, someone's taken them, shaken them up, and thrown them in the corner and walked on them. And then said, okay, put the puzzle together. How do you do that? Well, here's an example of one of the original scholars working with these fragments. Amazing when you think about it, how painstaking and difficult that work was. And this is what they did. They pressed them out between glass plates, and they lined them up in a room, and then they went through and they tried to identify them. Now, how you think, how would they possibly identify them? Well, if it's a biblical book, if it's a fragment of a biblical book, right, you could use a concordance and look up phrases and words and identify them. Or if it was a book, not a biblical book, but one that was already known from antiquity, you could do the same thing. Otherwise, if it was something, a brand new work that we didn't know before, you would just have to do it by the appearance of the fragments, whether or not the text made sense, and so those were the hardest. So when you look at this, you have to think that eventually they got sorted out into about 900 separate works. So 10,000 fragments, about 900 separate works. 25% of them were books from the Hebrew Bible. And what I mean by that is the Old Testament, right? So Genesis, right? Isaiah, Psalms. The most popular books of the Hebrew Bible that were found were Deuteronomy, with close to 40 copies, Psalms with about 35 copies, and then Isaiah with about 20 copies. And interestingly, those are the books that are the most quoted in the New Testament as well. Then the next 25 were works that we had known about from antiquity, but that didn't become part of the Old Testament. So, for example, the book of Ecclesiasticus, the book of the wisdom of Jesus ben Sira, which sometimes in the Episcopal Church we actually use as part of the lectionary readings. That showed up in Qumran. The book of Judith, the book of Tobit. Okay. Then, but 50% of them were works that had never been seen before, brand new works from the Jewish community in the time right before the life of Jesus on earth. So, very interesting for the history of both Judaism and Christianity. Most of them are in Hebrew. Some are in Aramaic, which is also a Semitic language closely related to Hebrew, and then a really small proportion are in Greek. Okay, so 3 languages. Okay, so now let me get, that's sort of your background, right? Now let me get to the topic, my topic today, the Bible. Now, when I say Bible, everybody here says, okay, I know what the Bible is. Okay? It's the canon of the church, right? The books accepted by a